Welcome to The Explainer. All right, today we're going to cut right through the noise and get into the hard numbers behind the economic impact of immigration in the United States. And we're using some brand new data to do it. So let's just start with a number that might make you do a double take. $14.5 trillion. According to a brand new study from the Cato Institute, that's the net fiscal surplus that immigrants contributed to U.S. government budgets from 1994 all the way to 2023. And yeah, you heard that right. That's a surplus, not a cost.
Right, so you're probably thinking, how is that even possible? I mean, a number that massive seems to fly in the face of so much of what we hear. So let's actually dig into the data, because that's where the story is.
Now, this study, it's not just pulling numbers out of thin air. It actually updated a really highly respected model from the National Academies of Sciences. And it points to three super clear, data-driven factors that build up to that surplus. Okay, first up, employment. And this one's pretty straightforward. The data shows time and again that immigrants are 12 percentage points more likely to actually be employed than U.S.-born citizens. You know, higher employment means more people paying income and payroll taxes, and that's the fuel that runs the government. Second point, what about what they take out of the system? Well, the study found that immigrants on average consume 25% less in government benefits than you'd expect based on their share of the population. So think about that. They're putting more in and taking less out. And the third piece of this whole puzzle, and this is a big one, is education. The vast majority of immigrants get here when they're already working-age adults. So what does that mean? It means the U.S. didn't have to pay for their K-12 education, which is a massive public expense. They basically arrive ready to work, and the government starts collecting taxes from day one. Of course, whenever you talk about the economics, the conversation almost always turns to the legal side of things, right? People will say, yeah, but what about the law? So let's go there. Let's look at the supreme law of the land, the Constitution. And this is where it gets really important. The key is one specific word. The 5th and 14th Amendments, they guarantee rights like due process to every person. It doesn't say citizen, it says person. And this isn't an accident. The Supreme Court has looked at this again and again and confirmed that, yep, that distinction matters. It applies to everyone on U.S. soil. And just to be clear, this is not some new, radical interpretation of the law. This is established precedent. The Supreme Court stated this plain as day, more than 2 decades ago. This principle is basically a cornerstone of American law. So what does due process actually mean in practice? Well, it means everyone, no matter their immigration status, gets some fundamental rights. You have a right to a hearing in front of a judge. You have a right to see the evidence against you. And the government, they have to meet a pretty high standard of proof before they can just deport someone. All right, so that's the big picture, national view, and the federal law. But let's bring this down to a local level. What does this actually look like on the ground? We're going to use Idaho as a case study to see how all this plays out in a real local economy. In Idaho, you've got this thing that economists call a labor vacuum. Basically, even right now, the state has more job openings than it has unemployed citizens to fill them. Now get this, if you were to remove the state's undocumented workforce, that gap would just explode to an estimated 70,000 unfilled jobs, almost overnight. And this labor isn't just spread out everywhere. It's highly concentrated in critical industries. Take dairy farming. A staggering 90%, 90%, of the hired labor on Idaho's dairy farms is immigrant labor. Industry experts are on record saying that if that workforce disappeared, the entire industry would start to collapse in about 72 hours, just 3 days. And this brings us to a fact that honestly sounds totally backwards until you really look at the numbers. Because undocumented workers can't claim most of the tax deductions or credits that are available to others, they often end up paying a higher effective state and local tax rate in Idaho than the wealthiest 1% of households. Let that sink in for a second. All right, this leads us to our final and maybe the most powerful point of all. It's one that really flips the whole drain on the system argument completely on its head, particularly when we talk about healthcare. Think of it like a one-way vending machine. Undocumented immigrants have payroll taxes automatically taken out of their paychecks, just like everyone else. That money goes straight into funding huge federal programs like Social Security and Medicare. But here's the twist. Federal law permanently bars them from ever collecting those benefits. Money goes in, but for them, nothing can come out.
So how much money are we talking about here? Well, if we just look at Medicare, immigrants paid $51 billion more into the system than they took out between 2012 and 2018 alone. That's a direct subsidy that helps keep the program afloat for all American citizens. So let's tie this all together really quick. What did the data show us? A massive, multi-decade fiscal surplus. Immigrants filling critical labor shortages and sometimes even paying higher effective tax rates. They're actively subsidizing American social safety nets that they themselves are forbidden from ever using, and all of this is built on a clear constitutional framework that protects all persons on U.S. soil. All of this really leaves us with a final thought. Based on all the economic and fiscal evidence, maybe the most important question isn't what it costs for immigrants to be here, but rather what it would cost all of us if that labor, those taxes, and that $14.5 trillion surplus were to suddenly just disappear.